But basically, I started this winery because I wanted to create a winery that really had a purpose behind it. And Republican Red came to mind pretty quickly. I'm a patriotic guy. I see a lot of problems, going on in the world around me in politics, and that was my motivation for starting this.
Hmm.
And got off to a great start in 2020. Got shut down by social media in the day of the election, and they shut me down for 6 months. And I've since revamped my business model.
Uh, we are recording. Welcome everyone to the San Diego Patriots Podcast, episode 28. And I'm sitting here with my new friend and colleague, Mr. Paul Johnson. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to chat with you. I know, funny enough, we only really met one another via a cell phone last week, but had a good
Yeah,
conversation and found out that we, agree on quite a bit. And I think, based on some of the research I've done on your business and, your background, I thought you would be an important voice for both myself to learn from, but also my audience. And there was a few
great.
major aspects. So, one, you're a fellow Californian who seems to be concerned of the future of our state as well as the future of the country.
Yeah.
You're also a business entrepreneur, so you run a successful winery up in Northern California. And I think, regardless of what field you're in, I always appreciate hustlers and people who pursue excellence in their field. And you're also a young father, so as in a father to a new child, which I think always kind of gives a new, fresh outlook on both issues and just how you manage your time. So I'm super excited to
Yeah.
talk, but I won't steal your thunder. Paul,
No,
maybe
no,
we could do
keep
a quick
going.
intro. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Paul Johnson, and I own Republican Red Winery. Um, I've got We can jump into the whole backstory and how I ended up here. Um, should we do that? Should we just hop in, or
So let's
what would you like to know to
get
begin?
a high level intro, and then I want to kind of get to
Yeah,
know like your early upbringing and kind of your background, get an understanding of how you think, and then I'd love to jump
sure.
into what you're up to today.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my name's Paul Johnson. I own Republican Red Winery. Um, First and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. Family comes first. That's why we work. That's why we do what we do. Um, and I'm passionate. I grew up in the wine industry. I'm very passionate about wine. I learned from my dad. And there's a whole story there that I can go into uh, further on in the podcast here. Um, but basically, I started this winery because I wanted to create a winery that really had a purpose behind it. And um, this was back. I originally had the idea back in 2016, but really started the winery in 2020. And the idea behind it is that the left had been done an amazing job of using the media to portray Republicans as what I call as heartless bigots. That's who we are, and it's all they show on the media. And so the original reason why I started this was kind of as a response to that. Wine is something that connects people. You have a glass of wine, you chat, you talk. Um, Wine is also kind of it's sophisticated. It's kind of there's some grace and class involved with wine, and it's just something you do when you share a meal, you share a conversation. And my thought behind it was, if the label, when people look at it, can start a conversation around something that's important and gain some understanding of each other, that maybe we can make some headway here. That's why I started the brand. And since then, it's, in some respects, a brand like this kind of takes a life of its own. People, what the wine means different things to different people. Um, but it's an America first brand. It's, it's a real patriotic thing to put down this bottle of wine on the table and to say, this is who I am. and let's talk.
And were you, so you mentioned that your father was in the industry of wine producing and growing and
Yeah.
managing wineries. Was that local to Monterey area?
Yeah. So I'm born and raised in Monterey County. I'll give you the backstory. It's a good one.
Yeah.
So my family story is really a Grapes of Wrath story. If you're familiar with, John Steinbeck's book, um, you know, after the Depression, the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, the Okies left Oklahoma and came to Salinas. And it was a very common thing to do because, the economy was wrecked in Oklahoma. The Dust Bowl had kind of ruined the um, agriculture in Oklahoma. And so people migrated to Salinas. My grandfather was one of 16, and I guess 11 of the children survived past infancy. And
Wow.
yeah, and his father deserted the family shortly after the 16th was born. And then about a year later, his mother died. And so here he was, as found himself as kind of the patriarch of the family at 21 years old, and moved the whole family to Salinas. And as the story goes, because they moved over in different waves, and the final siblings that moved over literally had to stop off in Bakersfield because they ran out of money and picked cotton for the summer just to make it all the way to Salinas. And so that kind of backdrop of, it's a real American story, right? Like hard work, grit, perseverance. And that's what landed us here in Salinas. He became a foreman for a wealthy landowner and just farmed his ranches for him, and did well enough to send my dad to Fresno State, and he studied viticulture. So my dad, being a smart guy, was really a pioneer of the wine industry here in Monterey County. So in the early 70s, 1973 actually, he planted the very first vineyard in what is now known as the Santa Lucia Highlands. And it's
Wow.
world renowned for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. He went on to start his own winery called Lockwood that was nationally distributed, and then sold it right around 2014. But I had already begun, I've worked in the vineyards my whole life. And, as an adult, spent about 15 years managing our family vineyards. Fast forward to 2019, that was our last harvest that we ran the vineyard operations ourselves. So my folks actually ended up leasing out the land and collecting rent. And so I found myself going, well, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I had this idea of starting a winery, and that's what I did. And this is in the face of my dad going, whatever you do in life, don't ever start a winery. Like, don't do it. And he had really good reasons, because if you try and go through retail, to the grocery stores or restaurants, you are competing with the big, huge wine companies like Gallo and Constellation, who control the shelf space. And whenever you sell alcohol, you have to go through a distributor. It's actually part of the 21st Amendment. It's called the three tier, three tiers of alcohol distribution. And so as a producer, you have to go through a distributor to get to the retailer. And if you're a big producer, you demand a lot more attention from the distributor. And so it's really difficult to compete through that channel, which is why you see a lot of the smaller boutique wineries open up tasting rooms, and they keep their production very small. And so that way they don't have to go through distribution. The problem with that model is now you're in, here in Monterey County, you're in, there's a bunch of tasting rooms in Carmel by the Sea. But now you're one of 15, 20 different tasting rooms, and you're competing for foot traffic and people going through your tasting rooms so that they can taste your wine and then become wine members and so forth. So it's also very competitive. And even if you do really well there and you really start to grow, then all of a sudden the only way to continue growing is to go through retail. And now you're stuck with problem number one again. So I really thought about these lessons that he gave me of don't start a winery. And something that's he hadn't really considered, and we take it for granted, but it's really, Amazon isn't, hasn't been selling anything other than books for, 10, 15 years at this point. So e-commerce is still a relatively new development, and especially in the wine industry. So I thought to myself, I can avoid going through retail. I can avoid being stuck fighting for foot traffic if I try and compete online and find customers that way. So that's kind of how I arrived at my business model. Then I thought to myself, what am I going to do? How am I going to find people and online? And the way you do that, and what I reasoned, is you have to have something you're passionate about. You have to find communities of people that rally behind something.
Yeah.
And for me, I thought, what would I want to see? And Republican Red came to mind pretty quickly. I'm a patriotic guy. I see a lot of problems, going on in the world around me in politics. And that was my motivation for starting this. And got off to a great start in 2020, got shut down by social media in the day of the election, and they shut me down for 6 months. And I've since revamped my business model, and I now partner with Republican and conservative organizations across the country. They help me get the word out. When I get sales coming in, I make donations, and we have a good partnership in that regard. And all sorts of other stuff I'm doing, filming a documentary, doing all sorts of stuff. So
oh yeah,
that was a long answer to your to your question, but it really, each one of those parts of that story are actually critical in just getting to this point of where I am right now.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you emphasize the grit and perseverance of your ancestors, right? Because I think that many of us, the society we live in today, we live in a very clean, privileged society, right? And I think that's how, when some folks are born into that, they forget that life, that you need to work hard and you need to overcome adversity and you need to pursue forms of responsibility that, even if they may be difficult, are very rewarding and necessary, both for yourself and for your community. So I know, similar to myself, like my mother was a boat refugee, right? So she literally fled her country on a boat, came to this country, loves waving her American flag, put herself through school. And anytime didn't want to go to school or do my homework, she slapped me across the face and reminded me, hey, like I went through hell for you, so you need to take ownership of that. So I see a lot of that in yourself, and I've seen that as a common denominator with a lot of folks who pursue excellence and build businesses and have that kind of fire underneath their butt to grow and build something. So and so I appreciate that that you started with that. And I'm curious, when it comes to the Republican branding. So you mentioned that you yourself, consider yourself a Republican. Were you always politically aware and involved? Was that something that you always thought about, or no?
No, I mean, growing up in a farming family, I was certainly raised, with conservative values, and with Republican ideals. That's always been the culture that and not just in my family, but in our community, so it's always been around me. But honestly, it never really interests me, as a younger person. It was, I felt it was not something I could really have much say over, right? Like what does a vote it's just one of millions and millions of votes. And I've
Yeah.
never heard of a
Wouldn't make a
major
difference.
election. I've never heard of a major election coming down to one vote, like, and to stay up on everything requires a lot of effort and a lot of, it just seemed complicated and out of reach as a younger person. But, over time, the major things are when you run a business, you start to see how all the policies that are made really affect day-to-day decisions. And when you start a family, you start to see the importance of values and the importance of wanting to preserve, for me, it was preserving the freedoms that, I've enjoyed. And I think they're under attack right now. I think there are two very different political camps at play right now. And, how this plays out over the next, this election is, it's critical, and beyond that, obviously, if you look back, it's been a tug of war. What we call woke now, or, cancel culture, 20 years ago, there's, political correctness.
Yeah.
And it's all the same thing. This battle, this push and pull has been going on for decades. And I see it coming to a head. And when you've got like I said, when you own a business, when you have a family, I no longer felt that I could just sit and take a back seat and let other people deal with it. And, one way of doing it is just by making a stand. What do they say? You don't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table. But why not? Like,
yeah,
our people have fought and died for our freedoms, and, to be guilty through omission, to be guilty by not taking a stand, by not having discussion around politics is irresponsible.
I totally agree with that.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why we're in this predicament is because of the fact that people don't want to talk politics or religion with one another, right? And so I'm born in '97, and a lot of my peers have the same mindset that you mentioned, right? It's like, well, what the hell does my vote matter, right? Like, the world's going to shit anyway. There's nothing we can do about it. And I used to think the same thing, right? And I used to think the same thing about my own life in many ways. But I know that growing up and throughout college, I get done with school, and no one's going to do my homework for me. No one's going to pass my classes for me. It required individual ownership of my situation. And I saw that if I made a series of bad mistakes, I can make my life worse. But on the other hand, if I make a series of good mistakes, I can make my life better. And the more mature I got over, my professional career, I started to see that, okay, well, yeah, I'm sick of all the homelessness around the streets. I don't want my car to get broken into or have that fear or threat, right? Like, I don't have children, but I want my children to be able to walk to school without a problem, without any issues. So, yes, is the world going to shit in many ways? It is, but I think that there are a lot of things that we can control and do to help turn things around. So whenever I talk to people, left wing, right wing, black, white, religious, not religious, I always find common ground, and I say, okay, regardless of what your views are, do you want lower gas prices, grocery prices, and crime rates, or higher? And most people say, well, of course I want lower. It's like, okay, well, hey, there's at least some common ground. Now we can argue about how to get there, but we're in agreement that we want the world to improve, right? So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I do think that why the left has been able to take such control over the narrative and over the youth and how they think is because they make you, not want to talk politics, or they make you, oh, well, that guy is a conservative. He has an American flag, and he probably doesn't like black people. Don't talk to that guy, right? And then now we start to build these silos in these groups. So I do believe that we kind of hit, I always say the political pendulum swings both ways. And, you're older than myself, so I'm sure you've seen a lot more back and forth over the years. And I always say that I think, we hit kind of our peak woke, radical left neo-communism, maybe a year ago, right? Because
I
we
hope
have more
so.
people today who are actually, who feel comfortable speaking up about it where they didn't
Yeah.
before, right? So I'm
Yeah.
curious your thoughts on that, especially since 2016, right? So that's when Trump was elected. That's a big slap in the face to the machine and the media mob and all that. And to
Yeah.
my
Well, I
understanding, a
mean,
lot of this,
you can
yeah,
see how they reacted to that, right?
yeah,
I
exactly.
didn't I didn't I didn't think one of my I mean, maybe I shouldn't say it's one of my favorite moments, but something that hops out at me is the people crying in the stands when Hillary Clinton lost, when she realized she lost the election. And it stuck with me because it's like they were just shocked. Like could not believe that they didn't win. And since then, I mean, it has just been an all out attack, to regain their power.
Yeah.
And I just see one of the fundamental differences between, to simplify things, the right and the left, you know, the left, the people in power on the left are wanting to usurp power and centralize it for themselves.
Mm.
Um, and they make promises to the people, we're going to give you this and this and this, but they're not helping the people. They're not, what they're trying to say is, well, we know how to run things better than you. We're just going to run things and we'll give you your piece of bread a day. And man, that is a very different outlook on life than the right that looks at individual freedoms above all. And, you succeed or fail based on the merits of your own work ethic and intelligence and luck, right? And that's not to say that, you know, there should be some sort of short-term safety net for people when, life really, runs you up and down. But this like welfare state and this idea that the more power you give to the government, the better off we'll all be. Like we couldn't be more different in just our approach. And in my opinion, it's totally un-American.
Yeah.
This leftist approach. It runs completely counter to our Constitution, to what the intention behind our republic. Um, and it's nothing. I want to live and die by my own effort. And we've lost that. We've as a country, people aren't fighting for that anymore. They're not fighting for freedom. They're just, through COVID, people just willingly gave up their freedom.
Yep.
And like, oh yeah, the government like, they'll know better than me. Just willfully gave up so many you know the just our basic rights, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble. It's just incredible to me. And to me, that's a population that has not been educated in the American way,
Yeah.
and quite the opposite. People have been educated in the opposite direction for decades now, and we're really seeing the price of it. So it's going to take people like us to right the ship, and we're fighting an uphill battle, but it's time to dig in and make it happen.
Yeah. And, all throughout history, whenever we see the rise of these totalitarian states, as a consequence of that, and actually a main contributor of that is individual people like you and I not speaking up and not finding common ground and not speaking our voice out loud, right? Because when we think of this political correctness, like that was originally a Soviet term, right? It's a communist phenomenon. It's basically, whatever's politically correct is any verbiage or words that help the regime. Anything outside of political correctness harms the regime. It's not just about pronouns and and all that stuff. So but if it's easier, and I always mention, one, we're in California, so there, I think we're outnumbered 1 to 5, left leaning versus right leaning, let's say. And especially
Yeah.
among Gen Z and the younger generation, a lot of them love their social justice progressivism, right? But what I've found is even if you and I can agree that there's only two biological sexes, right? If we will get ousted by saying that out loud, then we may just choose the path of least resistance and the easy road by just remaining silent or just saying, okay, you're right. There's not just two biological sexes. And it may seem minor in the moment, but that all accumulates when everyone decides to do that. And now we find ourselves in a position where, even for one specific topic, like, the gender affirming care, you have a lot of kids and families who are getting pushed into this ideology that ends up making their lives much worse. So, are we really helping people and being compassionate now when the outcome is so much worse, right? Same thing with homelessness. You apply this, progressive, view on, them being a victim, and we don't want to pick them up off the street and help them because that's taking away their freedom, however they word it. But look at the alternative. Now they're, got heroin needles sticking out of their butt and crapping their pants on the street. It's like, that doesn't seem humane, right? So it's this, that's another communist phenomena where they say that they're doing it for compassion and for your own benefit, right? We're locking everyone up because it's safe. We don't know about this COVID pandemic. We don't want anyone getting sick, and you're getting in the way and you're causing problems by not wearing your mask and getting your shot, right? So, it's interesting how we see this throughout history, and we see it in the history books, right? But when you look at these, woke neo-progressives or Marxists, let's say, they have a different outlook on history, right? They think that the United States is only powerful and successful because we've exploited other nations and, raped Native American women, right? It's like, that's how they view, us being powerful, versus maybe you and I would, have a more similar outlook that, hey, the past of America isn't perfect, but in Western civilization, we've been able to grow and excel at such an alarming rate compared to everyone else because of the core values that we have according to the Constitution, because we prioritize individual liberties and allow you, as someone who loves making wine, to go build a winery, and me, someone who loves to sell or create a podcast, to go do that and pursue excellence, right? And, so again, it's like we almost have to go back and remind the basics to the younger generation of like, hey, remember, we want lower gas prices, right? We want more
Yeah.
freedom to choose, right?
Yeah. I mean, going back to this, the use of, identity politics,
Yeah.
where, certain groups of people are protected against others. And this whole notion, again, it goes completely against, like, it's just so hypocritical to me, because on one hand you're saying, oh, we exploited these groups, and that's why America's so evil, and so what we're going to do about it is we're going to further divide us into different groups, and then we're going to take from this group and give to that group. And really, and we have gone through, there was a time where Black Americans were not allowed to vote. There was a time, I mean, there were slaves. There were times when women weren't allowed to vote. That's in our history. But we are where we are now. We've grown through those times. And at this point, we are equal under the law, every person. And what more could you ask for than to be equal under the law? So sure, we've had bumps along the road, that I don't think anyone's proud of, but look where we are now. And as far as our Constitution and the laws that govern the land, in that regard, I think there's a lot to be proud of there. And then, it's in between when I, after my parents leased out the land and I was trying to figure out what to do next, I actually went back and got my MBA at Santa Clara University. And
Beautiful campus.
It's a beautiful campus. Beautiful. And, had a great experience there, learned a lot. But man, the DEI stuff is on every campus, and it is real. It is real, and it's intense. Um, I had a situation there where I responded to an email from the diversity, the Department of Diversity and Inclusion, and it was an email about um, Transgender Remembrance Day. And the way that I started reading through the email, they turned this back to a Black Lives Matter movement. It's like they couldn't figure out which group they needed to represent on this day and who was the most victimized, And I'm reading
Yeah.
this stuff going, you know, they've lost me on what they're trying to do here. This is, so I respond to all, which is there's 3 emails up there. One of them happened to be the entire student body. And I responded in horror. I responded by saying, would you please take me off of this distribution list? That caused such an uproar. And, luckily I'm not, an underclassman who, worried about where to get my next, job and stuff. I'm, in my 40s, I'm secure in who I am in that regard. And what it occurred to me, and I had students, underclassmen, sending me messages saying, thank you so much for speaking up. I wish I could.
Wow.
But we can't, because if you speak up in this way, you're blackballed. Like you can't go to social events. Like it's just really intense. And so it just occurred to me that this center of diversity and inclusion could not be less diverse. Right? It's either you follow what we say and you follow the rules that we set, or you're going to get blasted. And there is no inclusion, because if you don't think the way that they do, you're out. And it's total bullshit. And I responded after all this came down. I sent another message to the dean of the whole, the president of the school and the head of the diversity and inclusion, and said, you guys are an absolute joke. To call yourselves, to let this happen. And there was another person who was on that, who also spoke up saying they wanted to be off the list, and it turned into a really ugly situation. And it's just such a shame.
Wow. And I'm wondering, so it's interesting you say that, because a lot of folks who I think are kind of speaking out against the woke mob, sometimes they go through a cancellation attempt or some chaotic scenario like that, where they're like, what the hell's going on here? And then that kind of pushes them down the path of being more vocal about that. So did you find that was like a catalyst for you in terms of starting to speak out against this phenomena?
Yeah. Or? So while I was going through school, I had started Republican Red. So okay. I was already pretty outspoken, and some of the professors, really gave me kind of a cold treatment. But once I got to know them and they got to know me, they warmed up and realized, okay, but that's what it is. It's just, yeah. And it's just fear, right? Like, and so that leads me into, this is a good segue into, I'm filming a documentary through our winery, and it's called Shades of Red. And the premise behind it is we go out and walk a day in the life of Republicans, Americans from completely different walks of life, and really get to understand why they vote Republican. Why is it that they are conservative? And, we're not just one group of people. It's kind of a response to how well the media has portrayed Republicans as heartless bigots and stifled open communication. And what I thought to myself is, well, how do you combat that? How do you deal with that? And the way you deal with it is by showing real, authentic people in their daily lives. And so that's what I set out to do. And I started here in Monterey. And I thought, if I can walk a day in the life of 3 totally different people here in Monterey County, just in central coastal California and show how strikingly different these people are, but yet they are Republican, then we can start to dispel this notion, this fear of like, oh man. And so that's what I've been up to. And we've got some like online, some social media kind of stuff where people claim their shade of red and kind of
Yeah.
give the reason of why they vote Republican. And I think it's really important that people do that. Some people it's for, business, like regulation reasons, and other people it's size and scope of government and freedom of speech. For other people, it's social issues and religious issues. There's every person that I've talked to has had a somewhat of a different angle, and yet we all vote Republican. And so there's common threads that unite us, obviously. And I've found those to be more of a focus on personal freedoms, personal rights, and wanting to preserve that and being able to kind of rise and fall on your own merits through your own hard work. And I think I've seen that to be a real common thread between, conservatives in general.
Yeah.
So that it's been a really good, fun project to work on.
Yeah, and so I would be curious. So you mentioned that you're finding these common denominators between the folks that will consider themselves Republican or conservative. So one of the things that you and I briefly talked about last week, but I always mention Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with those folks. So Thomas Sowell is an economist. He's probably 94 years old now. He's a Black guy. And he's, a conservative Republican, and a lot of, and I love the ideas that he talks about. He's my favorite economist. He also talks about culture, all this stuff, and it's always interesting because you don't see him get promoted a lot, or you at least haven't seen that in the past 10 years, right? And the reason why I bring him up quite a bit is because yes, I love his ideas. I don't think it matters that he's a Black guy, but there's a lot of people out there who, when they see a Black guy who considers himself conservative, they're a little bit shaken up. They're like, well, wait a sec. Like, I thought conservatives don't like anyone who isn't a straight white Christian male, right? Like, what's going on here? Same thing with when you look at a lot of the Vietnamese population. So down here in Southern California, we have the largest population of Vietnamese people outside of Vietnam, primarily in Orange County. And if you look, they love Donald Trump and they love the Republican Party because half of them are here because they fled a communist country. They don't like socialist ideas, right? And it's the same thing, especially in the past 10 years, you always see that, the Democrat Party is the party of minorities. Yet you go down to Miami and all the Cubans love Donald Trump and they love the Republican Party because guess what? They fled a communist country as well, right?
Yeah.
And I always talk about my tattoo artist here in San Diego. He's a guy from Cuba. And he's been here maybe 6-7 years and he already became a citizen, like worked his butt off, makes good money, owns his own business, total entrepreneur, fantastic artwork as well. And him and I would always talk about socialism's a bad idea. Like it's been tried before. Look at Venezuela's collapse in the past decade, right? Every country it touches implodes to some degree, right? So why are, so again, I bring up the various shades of red, right? So you have people of all colors and religions and backgrounds who consider themselves conservatives because of the values that they believe in and believe to be true and believe will help them find success and happiness as well as other people. So I really resonate with the mission of the documentary and look forward to hearing, some of the different perspectives.
Yeah. It's a great project we're working on, and keep in touch with us. Check it, Republican Red, join our email list and you'll see how it comes along.
Oh, definitely. And I know, so I know we didn't double click on this, but I wanted to spend some good time on the challenges that you ran into in 2020. So I know you mentioned that you started Republican Red in around 2016. That's really when I think a lot of this kind of woke craziness popped off, like we said, in response to Hillary losing and Donald Trump winning. But I believe, we had Donald Trump for 4 years, 2020, come election time again, the regime is pissed, the media is pissed, they want to win at all costs, they're willing to lie and censor and do all this crazy stuff. So what was your experience at that time? Like how did that all kick
Yeah.
off and how did it
You,
start?
actually, I had the idea for Republican Red I had in 2016 around that election, but I actually didn't start it until 2020 when I had the
Okay.
bandwidth to do it. And I launched in around this time, actually, the middle of August in 2020. And I remember it because I was, I think, 10 or 12 weeks out from the election. And I think I was 12 weeks out when I started. And just with some simple ads and, setting up this a website, I sold over $700,000 worth of wine in 10 weeks leading up to election, which
Wow.
for a winery starting from zero, and I'd never done e-commerce. I'd always been on the farming side of the wine industry. Um, it was incredible. I had suppliers just absolutely dumbfounded that I was growing at the rate that I was. And so 12 weeks into this, and I was packing orders out of my living room, like rearranging my living room, pushing the couches back every day and just packing orders. I had certain days I had multiple UPS trucks coming by to pick up the orders.
Wow.
And it was just, yeah, it was amazing. All while and the week that I started the business was the week that I started my MBA program. So
Wow.
it was
Stressful
a little
days, huh?
insane. I honestly don't know how I did it, but I did. And so we're moving this inventory out of the house. I lost my train of thought somehow. Um, Remind me again what we were talking about.
So
The
you're about 12 weeks in, you're
Yes, and getting shut
multiple
down.
UPS
Sorry.
trucks. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. I get too excited about this stuff. So 12 weeks in, the day of the election, Facebook, Google, Twitter, they all at the same time, because there was questions about, right, the legitimacy of the results. They turned off, if they deemed you a political organization, they completely turned off your ability to advertise. And that's how, and here I am, a winery. I'm not a PAC or a campaign. I'm just a winery for Republicans to share their love of country.
Yeah, private
And
business.
yeah, and but they shut me down and shut me down for 6 months because while the election was getting worked out, then January 6th happens and the left freaks out and shuts it all down again. And so here you have a handful of people in Silicon Valley completely controlling the narrative, the media. And it completely buckled my business. I was not able to get new customers. And at the time, like I said, I started school. So I was like, well, I'm just going to set this aside for a while and focus on school. And that's what I did. And once I finished, I went back to the drawing board and went, okay, how can I rebuild this business without having to rely on, these social media companies that are so willing to take away your freedom of speech. And in the sake of community standards, we're going to say what you can and can't say.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we still have, a presence on social media. It's a necessary evil at this point. But I mean, I appeal to people, go to Public Square or go to some of these other outlets where they're America First companies. And you have, Elon Musk has since taken back over Twitter and is at least doing a better job of allowing freedom of speech. Truth Social, but I mean, man, the community standards and all this BS that's on Facebook and Google is out of control. And I see
Yeah,
it
I
as
mean,
just
simply,
an extension of the left's reach.
yeah, and it comes down to, how they classify this hate speech, right? And I think what we've come to learn over the past few years is they'll just classify anything that disagrees with them as hate speech. So
Yeah,
even if you have anything that's, keyword Republican, they're going to bucket that with
right.
some algorithm saying that, okay, this guy's a terrorist against the regime. Well, okay, well, we don't want him getting his advertisement out there, and we don't want him selling his products because, that's not good for us, right? It's that whole threat to democracy.
Yeah.
So that's crazy because you were making so much, like the business was booming, you're making good money, yet you shut down for a few years, right? Like,
Yeah.
the way I see it is, fortunately you had, you were working on school, you had other means of, revenue coming in and taking care of yourself. Imagine all these businesses out there that don't, right? That their livelihoods are completely wiped clean. I mean, have you come across stories like that as you've gotten your message out and
Oh
talked to
yeah. No,
people?
I mean, and I took I had a lot invested, and um, so no, it was a big, it took a big financial hit because of
Yeah.
that. And I've had to rely on support from, my family to get through that time and to get back on my feet. And, I'm fortunate enough to have family that can help support me. There's a lot of people out there who don't have a safety net, and yet they still have that entrepreneurial spirit, and they're still putting it all out there anyway. And, if you've got that spirit, then you're just going to dust yourself back off and get back up and keep going. And if you've got that kind of grit and, are even mildly intelligent, it's that grit and determination that will get you through. And, you'll get back up and, you know, keep going. And so, um, to me, that's the American spirit. It's dusting yourself off when things don't go right and going, all right, let's do this because it's up to you. It's not,
Yeah.
we're not here to rely on other people to take care of us. And to me, that's just such a fundamental difference between this, like kind of Marxist, radical left approach of what can the government do for me? I'm just, I'm going to do the bare minimum and just watch TV and eat fast food or whatever. And, that's no life I want to live. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, what am I entitled to, right? Like, what, I can work the bare minimum and my company should still pay me and still give me resources. We see it out in the employee market as well, especially I always shit on Gen Z, but that is technically my era, but it is more common, right? And it is this kind of mind virus that is in many ways, I always refer to it as an anti-Western Marxism, right? Which it really is. It's this idea that, oh, you're only successful because you exploited other people or because you're privileged and you have white skin. It's like, no, that's actually not the case. Like you worked your butt off, went through
Yeah.
very difficult times and learned how to pick yourself back up during those low points. And one of the common themes of my podcast is wisdom for young Americans, right? Especially young men who I think have really been, beaten up over the past decade or so. But, whether so politics or not politics, you were able to pick yourself up and get through those very difficult times. Like, what advice would you have for young Americans out there, or even young men, when they go through these very difficult lows? Like, how do you get yourself out of that? How did you compartmentalize?
Yeah.
Was it fast? What did it take years? How would you offer some advice to the youth?
Um, my advice is to be vulnerable. My advice is when things aren't going well and you're having a tough time, as we're taught, especially if you've got this mindset of building and creating and, of that drive, there's a bit of perfectionism that's just inherent in that drive. You want to do better, you want to build, you want to create. Um, But when things don't go your way, my advice is to kind of just be vulnerable. Be vulnerable with the people around you who you love and talk about how you're really feeling and the struggles that you're really going through. Because you're going to find, especially if you talk to, you know, there's a lot of other cultures that do a better job of talking to their elders, talking to people that have had more experience than you, and go talk to them, go open up, and you'll find they'll 9 times out of 10, they'll chuckle and be like, been there, know exactly
Yeah.
what you're talking about. And don't worry, because I'm still here. Like, you know, and then we'll give you sage advice. And so, you know, be vulnerable and then be willing to listen and really hear what they're trying to say and where they're coming from, because you can't do it alone. You don't have all the, none of us. And I think as you get older, you just realize that none of us have all the answers. And just to kind of take little pieces of wisdom where you get them, take your opportunities where you get them, and that's good enough. That's a good life right there.
Yeah, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And then I'm also hearing a lot about humility there. And that's actually something I really resonate with because, I started off my career in sales, right? So if you're entry level sales, you're cold calling 100 calls a day and getting told to go F yourself. And you have to develop thick skin and learn how to actually, pick yourself back up during those hard times.
Yeah.
And one of I was very blessed to have met mentors over my time, right? And I always recommend to other people, find a mentor. Ask them the good, the bad, and the ugly. What do you wish you did differently? How can I improve if you were in my shoes? Everything like that. And it starts with humility, right? Like even right now, if I'm working with a potential customer and my boss, who's 10 years older than me and has seen a lot more, closed deals than I have, if he makes some recommendations, it would probably wouldn't be in my best interest to say, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to just keep doing things my way. Like I'm going to consider what he has to say, and maybe I disagree with it after listening to him, but I learn through that advice that I'm getting from him. But it starts with being open to it, not just closing your
Yeah.
ears, right? And I think that's the problem with even the political dialogue today is so many people they plug their ears and they don't want to hear what anyone else has to say. They know and they have their mind set. So it translates both to dialogue, politics, but also learning as a man and as an adult and being able to build and develop, right?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And yeah, it really is just being willing to listen to the people around you, and without losing yourself, right? And I think you kind of alluded to that. Just because you listen to other people doesn't mean you agree with them. It just means you listen and you soak it in and you consider where they're coming from, and you'll be much more well advised at that point to make a better decision.
Yeah. What would you say would be your hopes and dreams for the future of Monterey, future of California, the future of the United States and the rest of the world?
Oh man, that everyone has a bottle of Republican Red at their dinner table.
I'm going to buy a bottle. My mom loves wine, so I'm going to buy a bottle for her and just
Yeah,
keep
yeah, I
getting her
got
to
them
see
all
which one
lined
she
up.
likes.
I got them all lined up back here. Um,
Perfect.
I mean, my hopes. I look at it from the point of view of my children and someday grandchildren. I hope um, that they inherit a country where they're free to create, free to enjoy the fruits of their own labor, that they're allowed to succeed or fail based on their own merits. They can have freedom of speech, um, and where their life isn't controlled by some people in Washington D.C. or Sacramento. The more that we can push decision making to the local level, the more influence everyday Americans can have over the policies that shape their life. Uh, so my hope is that we kind of take all this power that the federal government has just usurped over the past decades and kind of push it back down to the local level, and that we fight to preserve our way of life, this American dream. Because don't think for a second that we're not in a fight for it right now. And if we put down our guard, that these people in power on the left will just take it all. They'll take all the power because they want to be able to tell everyone else what to do and how to do it. And that's not what this country is founded on. And so I really hope we don't lose sight of that and people keep fighting for it.
I love it. And so where can some of my audience find you today? I'll, of course, include links that I'll post in the video bio, but also where can they find you and what should they be excited about for what you're working on?
So here's the wine, Republican Red.
Nice.
We've got a whole bunch of bottles. You just go to republicanred.com and we ship it right to your doorstep. So we've got a great website. We've got good things going on. You can connect with us on social media. Our handle is either Republican Red or Republican Red Winery, depending on the outlet. And the wine, I'm telling you, you bring a bottle of wine of this to a party or whatever and crack it open, it starts conversations. It's fun. I think, and people get worried. Oh, people, when I started, I had some family and people going, oh man, aren't you afraid of how people are going to come out of the woodworks and come after you? That hasn't really happened. I mean, there's trolls online that are nasty, but man, when it comes to, I haven't had any people, get in my face over, I bring this stuff everywhere. And more than anything, I get people that I didn't expect coming around going, good for you. Like, it's not only is it good wine, but like, they're Republican, and it would be people you wouldn't necessarily expect. And so anyway, that's what I love about what I do. And I appreciate you having me on here.
I love that you're passionate about it. When is the documentary coming out? I'm excited to see that. I would love to help out anywhere I can.
Okay. Well, like I said, we've built out the trailer. We have a couple of the episodes done. I'm hoping to get it done by the end of the year. It takes cash, it takes time. And so much of the business right now is focused on just the election and moving wine and getting it into people's hands. But I really hope to turn my attention back to it, right after the election, if not sooner.
Well, I know you're busy. I saw that your picture with Ron DeSantis and the fundraising that you guys hosted. That's awesome.
Yeah, and we have a new label that we're going to release in the next couple of weeks that kind of commemorates Trump's moment, fight, and raise some money for his campaign with it. And so keep an eye out for that. That's going to be a collector's piece, really special. And so keep an eye out for that as well.
I will do. Well, Paul, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your experiences, both positive and negative. Your love for country, your respect for where we came from and our heritage. You having the strength to speak it out against tyranny, because I think, as we know throughout history, that inspires other people to feel brave enough to speak up and stand for what they believe in and agree with you on. So I appreciate that. As a American and as a Californian, I appreciate you supporting these values and ideas. And again, even you being vulnerable enough to have a conversation like this, I think inspires young men and women to build and find what they're passionate about, figure out how to monetize it, then build an empire, right? Do big things, like
Yeah,
accomplish big things. So you're a huge inspiration, and I just am very grateful for you, offering your time and wisdom.
I appreciate that a lot. That's a high compliment. So thank you.
Sometimes.